Work smarter, not harder. That worked out for Hendrick Motorsports tonight. Let's break down the good, the bad, the ugly, and the Wendy's of the 2024 Daytona 500. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove, another Daytona 500 in the books, albeit 24 hours later than originally scheduled. You may notice I am not in Daytona Beach, Florida, unfortunately, sadly, tragically. I have some personal schedule conflicts really for tomorrow. If they'd run the Daytona 500 early, like at 11 a.m. this morning, maybe I could have gotten on a late flight and stayed, but the persistent rain, even into this morning, unfortunately made that impossible. I had a blast watching the Daytona 500 at home on television, like I'm sure many of you did as well. I'll have some thoughts on the Fox broadcast, but more importantly, we'll talk about the big winner, the several major multi-car crashes, what drivers stood out to me. At the end, we'll put this race on the Groovy Gauge. First, though, I gotta put on my sponsor hat for a moment. Ugh. NASCAR history and heritage comes to life at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Don't miss the latest edition of Glory Road, which explores racing history with 33-degree banking and 19 cars on display. Or the Ford Performance Showcase, a new exhibit that shows off the Mustang next-gen cars' design and innovation. Get behind the wheel of realistic iRacing simulators or take part in the Pit Crew Challenge. On Mondays and Fridays, guided tours take you behind the scenes with incredible stories and access to a Hall of Fame insider. Of course, you can always explore the hall at your own pace with the new Mobile Hub digital experience. Come celebrate new inductees Donnie Allison, Jimmy Johnson, and Chad Knaus. Their special class of 2024 artifacts are on display in the Hall of Honor. From the legends who shaped the sport to the new heroes looking for their place in the record books, the NASCAR Hall of Fame offers an unforgettable experience. Book your visit today at NASCARHall.com. You can also click the top link down in the description below. Now back to Daytona. Like I said, plenty of good, plenty of bad, plenty of ugly in this year's Daytona 500. Let's just start with the good. The crowd looked fantastic, looked packed for a Monday afternoon race. I get that it's a 3-day weekend for many, President's Day, but with the late start time, especially 4 p.m. local, I worried if many fans would show up. But that crowd looked like a Daytona 500 crowd. I'm sure the added value of an Xfinity Series race helped attract a few fans, but regardless, still a fantastic turnout for a Monday afternoon postponed race. And it was great to see The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, there to give the command, an epic command, I should say. I was worried the rain would wash away all the hype, the buildup, the pomp and circumstance. It really didn't. This looked like a Daytona 500. That was a very pleasant surprise. More good. Lots of side-by-side action, even some 3-wide racing, some strategy plays, especially in the stages, like stage 1. The whole pack was only going 175 miles per hour at one point. Yeah, these cars go over 190 in the draft. In the past, they've gone over 200. 173, 174, saving fuel. It was a little ridiculous. It didn't go on for too long, thankfully, but it was, for those 10 or 15 laps, really interesting. This race had a bit of everything. It had strategy in the stages, especially. We'll talk about Hendrick Motorsports and the Chevrolets in particular, but every green flag pit stop cycle, the Chevys came out ahead. Every single time. Work smarter, not necessarily harder. Up front tonight, it was Joey Logano leading a ton of laps in his Ford. Kyle Busch in his Richard Childress Racing Chevy was often the star of the show. He went back to the front 2 or 3 different times after pit road penalties put him behind. Ryan Blaney looked great at times. Denny Hamlin, 3-time Daytona 500 champ, looked like a star. But the Chevrolets, especially the Hendrick cars, typically would lay back in the stages, save more fuel than anyone else, and then spend less time on pit road, cycle to the lead, and then that's how Chase Elliott was able to win the first stage. We barely noticed the Hendrick cars that opening stage, and then suddenly it's Chase Elliott crossing the green and white checkered. And at the very end of this race as well, with about 25 laps to go, I tweeted that this race was going to come down to which team/manufacturer got on and off pit road the cleanest. And I pointed out that Hendrick and Chevrolet had been the best in the stages. Everyone was oohing and ahhing at Joey Logano and David Reagan and Kyle Busch making moves up front, Denny Hamlin. I felt like nobody else was paying attention to what many of the other Chevys, in particular the Hendrick Chevys, were doing deeper in the field. They were saving fuel. Ross Chastain, not a Hendrick car, but still a Chevy, cycled to the lead after that final cycle of green flag pit stops. made a few daring blocks to hold off a hard-charging Joey Logano. I'll give Logano credit. They may not have been on the best track position-focused strategy, but he's a wizard in the draft. Closing laps, he and his former teammate Brad Keselowski were bobbing and weaving through cars. It looked like something out of a video game, honestly. But good, smart pit strategy is what got Alex Bowman and William Byron up there in the mix in the closing laps. Of course, there's the big crash that took many of the fast cars out of contention. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But back to the good, plenty of pit strategy. In many ways, that's what helped decide this race in the end. Hard, but mostly clean racing throughout, some 2 and 3 wide action. We had the crash on lap 6, which could and probably should have been avoided. But for the next 170, 180 laps, these drivers raced really hard, but with respect. It was great to watch. And one more good, the winner, William Byron, gets his first Daytona 500 victory on the 40-year anniversary of Hendrick Motorsports' founding. Very special for William Byron, for Rick Hendrick, for longtime Hendrick Motorsports fans, I'm sure. Fresh off a 6-win season in 2023 that saw Byron getting to the championship 4, he has picked up right where he left off. And we even saw, at least for a moment, some genuine emotion from William Byron. I'll take what I can get. A lot of cheers when William Byron addressed the crowd, celebrated his massive Daytona 500 championship, but there was a spattering of boos I could hear over the Fox broadcast. Why boos? Does anyone actively dislike William Byron? I know a lot of folks think he's kind of bland, a little boring, kind of over corporate, very Hendrick, but nobody really dislikes William Byron enough to boo him, right? During perhaps the biggest moment of his racing career? Well, now let's get to the bad. Unfortunately, the final, I'd say 10 laps or so of this race did not live up to the first 190. First 190 laps were fantastic, but with 10 laps to go, 3 wide throughout the field, heading into turn 3, Alex Bowman bump drafting his teammate William Byron, gets him sideways. Byron hooks Keselowski up into Logano. All hell breaks loose. Massive crash, some scary impacts as well. Fox seemed to have more driver in-car cameras than I'm used to seeing. I mean, we saw Blaney almost hurt his wrist. He said afterwards it was fine. Ty Gibbs, wide-eyed, spinning through the grass. Eric Jones looking defeated. Joey Logano pissed off, perhaps the best car in the race. Nothing to show for it. A massive crash that took out many of the best cars in the field, except the Hendrick cars. Ironically, the 2 that started the incident made it through scot-free, and one of them went on to win the race. It's what we love and hate about Daytona International Speedway. We love it because anything can happen to anyone. We also hate it because anything can happen to anyone. In this case, perhaps someone who didn't necessarily deserve it. Yeah. Bowman, Byron, I don't know what they did wrong. I know the end of the back straightaway going into turn 3 is often a sketchy spot. We often see guys get turned out of line, get hooked there. I couldn't obviously see anything Bowman or Byron did wrong in that moment, but obviously they came together in a bad spot, caused a wreck. Byron did say after the race that, it was unfortunate. Like he felt bad, I think, that wreck started, I guess, because of he and his teammate, but it was clearly an accident. I've never driven a stock car at 190 miles per hour, bump drafting tandem style into turn 3 at Daytona, so it's hard for me to imagine what Bowman, what Byron were feeling in that moment, what went wrong, but something did go wrong, and it worked out in their favor. That's just how it goes sometimes, but I imagine that's why some fans were booing, because arguably the guy who kind of caused the big wreck that took out a lot of fast cars wins the race. That doesn't always sit right with people. That was bad. There was another push in this race that I also just thought was bad, and it was that lap 6 crash, lap 5, lap 6, whenever. They were going into the tri-oval. John Hunter Nemechek had just moved up to kind of block the third lane, try to ride that momentum. He was kind of slow and having a hard time kind of picking a lane. Keselowski hit him in the left rear, which spun him out, ignited a big crash. Took out Carson Hocevar, just a few laps into his first Daytona 500. Kaz Grala, who knows if he'll be back, wrecks out after making the show. Jimmy gets damaged, went multiple laps down. Gosh, man, cannot shake the bad luck. Jimmy. My initial reaction to this crash was, oh, Brad got another one, because we saw a couple of years ago in the Daytona 500, he spun out a couple of drivers in a similar spot. But after looking at the wreck more closely, Nemechek was slow, and he was kind of half out of his lane. He wasn't really holding probably the best line. I still think Brad had enough time to react and hit him more squarely. He just didn't. He was kind of getting pushed from behind. I don't put it all on Brad Keselowski. I also don't put it all on John Hunter Nemechek. You have an inexperienced Nemechek and an aggressive pusher in Brad. Just a bad mix there. But it was bad. It was bad to have a big crash like that take out some major storylines only 5 laps into a 200-lap race. It reminded me, a lot of this race reminded me of the 2012 Daytona 500. That's why I'm wearing this t-shirt. That Daytona 500 was also delayed to Monday due to rain. And that race also had a big crash, I think like 2 laps into it, if I remember. And it took out Danica, who at the time, I think, was making her first Daytona 500 start. I think it was her first. It was a big storyline. I remember that. She gets wrecked on lap 2, and it really wasn't her fault. So this kind of reminded me of that. Jimmy gets caught up in lap 5. Grala, Hocevar. A lot of interesting stories wrecked out. So that was bad. That was, yeah, we're talking about the good. Now we're talking about the bad of this year's Daytona 500. The crash coming to the white, I guess at the white flag because it ended the race effectively, was kind of weird. Ross Chastain had been aggressive all night before the big crash that saw Byron hook Keselowski into Logano. Chastain, not necessarily doing anything wrong, had made some very aggressive blocks. Here coming to the white flag, Chastain was not playing defense, he was playing offense. And we know Ross Chastain likes to swing away. He likes being on the offensive side of the ball. He went for a hole. There wasn't much of a hole there. Now, it wasn't all on Chastain here because Cindric, the guys on the bottom, got a little squirrely, got sideways. They got shot up into Chastain. But Ross definitely being aggressive. You wonder if, you had a whole lap to go. I know you want to take the run when you get it. You're never sure if you're going to get another one, but yeah, I'm sure he would maybe like to have that move back. In hindsight is 2020. Maybe try something different. Maybe not try a move at all there and wait another half a lap, see what develops. But yeah, a rough way to end this race. Again, great racing, I think, for 95% of this event. Those final 10 laps were just kind of bad. A lot of great drivers and good cars taken out by no fault of their own. And on the last lap, well, we didn't get a last lap, just like last year, just like 2 years before that, they made it half a lap before Keselowski and Logano crashed. It's always a bummer when they're not able to race back to the checkered flag, but I think it was the right call. I mean, they were at the white flag. William Byron, by this much, was ahead of Alex Bowman. Right call, just kind of a downer way to end an otherwise, I thought, spectacular Daytona 500. So we talked about the good, we talked about some of the bad. What was ugly about this race? The weather, the last 48 hours. Kyle Busch's pit crew was ugly. Early in this race, they failed to get the car full of gas, and we saw how important fuel mileage was. They also got a penalty, I think, for over the wall too soon, so double whammy on one pit stop. Busch didn't bat an eye, though. Drove right back up to the front like nothing ever happened. And then the final stage of this race, Busch's pit crew left the wheel nut off the left front. Couldn't get it on in time. Busch had to nurse a completely loose wheel all the way around that 2.5-mile speedway. Got it fixed. Went back out on track in last once again, and within 12 laps was leading. Kyle Busch. All week long, I wondered why so many people were on the Kyle Busch hype train. I get the narrative. This was his 20th year, 19th attempt, but 20th year trying to win the Daytona 500. Sound familiar? Driving for Richard Childress. Sound familiar? I get the narrative. That's fun, but I seriously didn't expect Kyle Busch to be that competitive tonight. I mean, he'd be good. Everyone's competitive at Daytona. I didn't expect him to be as fast or as aggressive as he was out there tonight. And let's put up the top finishers real quick. I haven't even looked. 12th. Dang, I thought he'd finish a little better than that. While I have this up here, look at some of these names. Alex Bowman, second. Great start to this year, much needed. Christopher Bell, third. Corey LaJoie gets a top 5. Another Daytona top 5 for Bubba Wallace. A couple of top 10s for Legacy Motor Club teammates. How about that? Noah Gragson gets 9th in his first race with SHR. Again, what do we love about Daytona? Anything can happen. It's also the worst part about Daytona sometimes. But back to the ugly. Yeah, Kyle Busch's pit crew was sloppy tonight. At one point, Richard Childress came over the radio and told the pit crew to get their heads out of their effing butts. Ugly, ugly. Oh, that's right. Fox airing a 3-minute Wendy's skit in the final 35 laps of the Daytona 500. That contrast was jarring. They're 3 wide, side by side. When's the big one gonna strike? Now, a word from Wendy's. Hey, we're playing mini golf over here. Baconator, DJ Khaled. Woohoo, another one. Whoa, what? Whoa, if you're gonna air a goofy Wendy's skit, that's fine. Do it in the first 35 laps, not the final 35 laps. Ridiculous placement, in my opinion. My jaw hit the floor, not in a good way. I'm not going to hate on the Fox broadcast too much. Yeah, there were a lot of commercials, especially in stage 2, but that's what they typically do. They front load the commercials for a big race like this that sells a lot, so that the final 30 laps or so, really after that Wendy's skit, they were basically commercial free. I get it. I don't always like it, but it's something that's not likely going to change. Did you see how much the next TV contract is worth? Did you see that tonight's race featured the largest single race purse in motor motorsports history. Who do you think forked over that cash, huh? Mostly Fox. Gotta make that money back somehow. I thought Kevin Harvick was solid in the booth, a little awkward here and there, but not bad. Clint Boyer was decent. Across the board, I thought their energy, especially on that caution that came out on the white flag, the energy was mostly there. The camera cuts weren't too bad. I really have very few serious complaints about the Fox broadcast night. I don't love the cartoon characters. The Wendy's bit was hideous, I will say that. The Dude Perfect, like, halftime YouTube video was interesting, but kids like Dude Perfect. If it gets them involved, gets them engaged, I'm all for it. I don't mind. Pre-race ceremonies were great. I honestly don't have any huge Fox complaints outside of the typical too many commercials, some bad commercial placements, and some weird audio mixing here and there. They got to get Mike Joy's mic away from his mouth a little bit. I hear him breathing. I think it's Mike Joy. I hear him breathing just a bit too often. And the Crank It Up segment during pit stops, interesting idea, cool premise. Would have been a lot cooler 5 years ago when they still had the 5 lug nuts instead of the one that sounds like 2 pieces of scrap metal scraping against each other. Cool idea still. Yeah, I honestly don't have any major complaints about the Fox broadcast tonight. Good, bad, ugly. So what's left? I guess we should put the Daytona 500 on the Groovy Gauge. How about that? Ooh, whoa. Would you look at that? The Groovy Gauge is now sponsored by my friends at Electric E-Bikes. Ooh, geez, shocked me. Goodness gracious. Head to electricebikes.com to learn more. I was dealing with serious FOMO this afternoon. I've been fortunate enough to go to the Daytona 500 the previous 2 years, 22 and 23, and obviously was supposed to go to this year's Daytona 500, had to miss it. And seeing the images on TV, the giant crowds, the celebrities that were still there, all the ceremony and excitement, I was kind of in the gutter. I was depressed that I couldn't stay, really was. But you know me, I always try to spin things into a positive. In many ways, that's a good thing. I'm sure I'm not alone. I bet there were a lot of fans watching this race who saw that and felt the same way and said, damn, I wish I was there. Maybe next year. Gotta add it to the list. The Daytona 500 looked and felt like a big freaking deal this time around. And again, outside of those final 10 laps, and maybe excluding the first 5 laps, the racing was great. Weird fuel strategy in stage 1. That great pass by Ryan Blaney on his teammate Austin Cindric for the win in stage 2. Kyle Busch coming from the back to the front. I saw Denny Hamlin do it once or twice. Logano slicing his way through the field in those final 15. Great racing, great action. I wish we could have gotten a green flag finish, and I wish guys like Logano, Blaney, Hamlin hadn't been caught up in that big crash with 10 laps to go, because they were the best drivers in cars for much of the day. I would have loved to see them duke it out in the closing laps, as opposed to, no disrespect, but Byron and Bowman and Cindric. Cindric was pretty good today. Was Preece in the mix? Was he on the lead lap? There are a lot of lead changes. A lot of drivers, had flashes up at the front today. I shouldn't discredit that. AJ Allmendinger was up there early on. Justin Haley was up there before, for the second race in a row, he had mechanical issues. McDowell had electrical or an engine issue or something, but he was fast obviously early on. Like, a lot of drivers spent time up front, got some TV time. So that was fun. The shuffling throughout the field, sometimes it looked gridlocked, but if you look closer, there were guys bubbling to the front, bubbling to the back constantly. The finish was kind of a downer, but overall I thought this was a very good Daytona 500. I'm going to give this race an 85% on the Groovy Gauge. Not the best Daytona 500 I've seen in recent years, but still very, very good. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you think this is too high, too low? Where would you rate this year's Daytona 500 on your own Groovy Gauge? I'm checking my notes. I don't think I missed anything big. I took a ton of notes for this race, and again, I've been up since 2 o'clock in the morning. I got like 2 hours of sleep. I'm feeling a bit delirious, so apologies if I did not talk about your favorite driver. I think everyone pretty much deserved a shout out tonight. Everyone had a moment near the front or at the front of the field, unless you were in that lap 5 or 6 crash. Ugh. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you're new here, I do this all throughout the season, every single week, usually Sunday night or the evening the race happens. I sit down, we talk about it, we break it down. During the week, of course, I catch up on all the latest NASCAR news stories, sometimes interview drivers, other special guests. So if you're new to the channel and you love all things NASCAR, this is the place to be for the 2024 season. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Again, subscribe if you're new to the channel and you love all things NASCAR. And a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for your very generous support. I'll have to check on my how my fantasy lineup did tonight. I don't think it did great. I think I had Hamlin and Logano. It was looking good for a bit. kind of faltered there towards the end. But I appreciate my Patreon supporters who are participating in that league. Thanks for your support. Again, I'm still honestly really bummed I can't be at Daytona right now. I'd love to be getting ready to watch the Xfinity Series race in person. I'll have it on while I'm editing this, of course, but a great event. It was fun to be out at Daytona the past few days. Got a lot of great work done. Got to meet a lot of great fans. Got to talk to a lot of drivers. Hopefully you've enjoyed the content on this channel the past few days. The season is here. We are officially back in business. Busy day in and day out. It's fun times. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Hope you stick with me for the rest of the 2024 season.